For many years, SHOT Show has been one of the biggest games of if you know, you know. SHOT Show itself, where those who are not there want to be there, and those who are at the show want to be home by Thursday. But you must endure, the company requires it. We here, or I here at Redacted, tend to keep a rather loose distinction between the gun culture and the firearms industry. And SHOT Show is an event that goes on every year that has, for the longest time, been very firearms industry centered. It is a firearms industry, hunting and outdoors related convention of sorts where you have to apply or request permission to attend. But at the same time, our generation and so much of what we call the gun culture can be found there. But why would we talk about it this way? It's going to be anecdotal. What did we see this year? What are the trends? What are the things that we think we should be looking forward to? Well, we are able to break down some of that, and I want to start before we get into the gear, and we will start and finish on this note, is the tone. I think for years, have illustrated what I think the tone of the industry is. Last year and the year prior, 2022 or 2023 and 2024, would be what I would recall or consider retrenchment. Now, of course, everybody meets at the show in January, and they usually talk about how their year was prior, or at least that's a good icebreaker. But let's talk about what the tone is going into 2025. This being a gun culture podcast and us being supported by elements of the firearms industry, the first sponsor of this show is Obsidian Arms, and we had a chance to sit down with them at SHOT Show this year and look at some of the new things they're coming out with. Now, we have featured some of their punch and tool kits here, but they also have a series of upgrades for your equipment that would be worth checking out. Now, if you check the link below, you're going to see a discount code, something that's going to give you a little bit of a break on that purchase, but it will also help in the long run because some of those tools will be useful for the longevity of your equipment. So if you want to support this show further, go ahead and check out Obsidian Arms at obsidianarms.com, and don't forget to use the link below. So back to SHOT Show 2025. The overall tone, as I stated earlier, this year is different than the last two. I myself have been going to SHOT Show rather regularly since 2022, so that would be 4 years consecutively, but then the first time I had gone would have been in 2015. And each year there seems to be maybe not so much a theme, but definitely a different tone that we pick up on. Now, I think last year I talked about how there was a stark difference between 2024's SHOT Show and 2015's SHOT Show, 9 years difference, where 2015 was very, very much so celebrities. You had entourages, you had very distinct social groups, whether they're from military backgrounds or otherwise. And so far as we are seeing now, we do still see some of those meme-worthy representations across the culture or the attendees. There's a delightful balancing of one set of scales. That isn't to say that there aren't some people who will prefer to be left alone, but that's not even worth getting into because that's not why we're here. But the big difference in the major shift from the 2023-2024 SHOT Show events to this year, which is starting 2025, is that in the last 2 years, we've seen this idea of retrenchment not necessarily being stated, but being represented. And what that looks like is that there's a lot less interest or attempt to expand into something new. The firearms industry was buckling down on what they could do with these small or limited resources that they had while recovering from the economic impact of the brace ruling, which was ultimately defeated, but it initially was launched the Friday before SHOT Show of 2023. And I have talked before about the major economic impact that had on the industry and trickled down into the culture, but it seems like the scar of that image or the scar of that event still was present last year, but is distinctly gone this year. And that could be attributed to some things like a change in the presidency or just a general optimism about the ability to go forward. This isn't universal. There are certain corners and types of manufacturing in the industry that is going to have to deal with some change. particularly say around AR-15s, is having 150, 200 different manufacturers that have large piles that are very hard to distinguish from one another isn't as easy to maintain. We saw record sales and production in 2020 and 2021, only for those to be injured in 22, well into 23 and going forward. But the question will be, and if we watch the trends across time, when there's a Republican in the presidency, the firearm sales tend to go down. And then when there's a Democrat or the threat of a Democrat entering power into the White House, then sales tend to go up. I think it's worth noting, though, that in our generation, in our lifetimes, the events of surrounding COVID and the 2020 BLM riots or George Floyd riots or whatever you want to call them did have an exacerbating impact on the reasons why people were purchasing more. And that ballooning of resources and purchasing, that ballooning of financial capability, the demand was so high, caused many companies to expand. And the question we're asking now is how many of them will continue going forward when they don't have that surge in demand. So let's start talking about some of the trends in equipment or gear that we saw popular this year. The first and foremost, and what I think is at the front and center, would be suppressors. The reason for this is not as much of a mystery. In the last year, we've seen the wait time that involves a Form 4, the form that you have to submit when you're going to purchase a suppressor from an FFL, used to be 9 months, 12 months, 18 months for some, and now we're seeing them come back with an approval within hours, if not days. And so that has been going on for the greater part of the last year, and we're seeing the demand in suppressors increase rapidly, and as a result, there's more and more motivation for them to be made. So how did we see that represented on the floor? We saw more new or new-ish suppressor companies popping up here and there than we had before. There are still the big names: Silencer Co., Dead Air, Huxworks. You can even have CGS and a few others. I mean, there's B&T has a new suppressor coming out. And so the first and the heavy end, or the one side of how I think suppressors are the trend or have been the trend, is because we're seeing more of them, more options. You have different companies. Some of them are going for less expensive suppressors. Some of them are going for more different capabilities or different performance types, lightweight, low light, low sound, those kinds of things. But we're also seeing some changes in what different companies are offering. Particularly, we'll use Dead Air, Huxworks, and B&T as an example. All three of them, when we talked to them, brought out a new suppressor that, in their description and the way that they presented it, identified some of the challenges that we're starting to see with flow-through style suppressors. Most of us, or if you've had a suppressor before, a silencer for some people, if you've had a silencer or a suppressor and you've been around for a while, you might know the difference between a traditional baffle stack suppressor or a, quote, flow-through style suppressor. But the difference is with the latter being, with the flow-through suppressor being a little bit more of a newer style. The technology that has gone into a suppressor, and I use that term a little loosely, is in its starkest form quite simple. You have an explosion expanding out of the muzzle of a gun, and you're trying to capture as much of that to not only reduce the light, the flash, the fire at the end, but also some of the sound, and it has some consequential benefits as going forward. Some firearms like them, some don't. There are things that you need to consider. And one of them being, if you're using a gas system, something that relies on the gas pressure of the expanding gunpowder burning into a gas, hence the name, whether it's a piston or a direct impingement system, you need to be able to adjust for the gas pressure increase when using a traditional baffle stack suppressor, or that's how we're taught. The idea and the invention or the development of what's referred to as more of a flow-through suppressor attempts to reduce the amount of pressure that's added to the internal system of the firearm it's mounted to. If you want to use this an example, a Mark 18, which was rather popular 10-ish years ago, is a 10.3-inch barreled AR-15 that's supposed to fire 5.56. The increased pressure that was added to that system when it was suppressed caused the parts to wear out so quickly that it was noted in Army manuals. The AR-15 itself has come in many different shapes and sizes, and those are rather expansive, but the shorter the barrel with a large gas port and a traditional baffle stack suppressor was increasing the pressure internally, causing the parts to not only move so much quicker, your bolt-bolt carrier group moving back and forth, but it caused additional wear. This is consistent across AR-15s, and this is where we saw sort of an adjustable gas block system being developed. And an adjustable gas block system was supposed to allow us to choose or adjust how much pressure is being added to the system or being cycled through the system. So let's say you turn it down and then add a suppressor, it'll rebalance to normal or optimal, whichever you prefer. But a flow-through suppressor, or what is referred to as a flow-through suppressor, is supposed to, as not even just marketed, but they do in performance, allow that gas to expand forward through the suppressor itself, and it allows the gun to operate very often as similar as if it was unsuppressed. You're still getting the benefits of a suppressed rifle. You're getting the lower sound, hopefully the lower light, and you're going to get a little bit of reduced felt recoil. But the challenge with a traditional baffle stack suppressor has a lot to do with its gas system, whereas a flow-through is supposed to, or ideally would, eliminate or reduce that. But now flow-through suppressors have been around for quite a while. I myself have known about them for about 10 years. And if they've been around before that, well, I'm not omniscient, so throw stones at me or something. Just not in public. I think that's illegal in this country for now. But if you're going to, a flow-through suppressor is a newer version of a suppressor, and having been around for about 10 years, we're starting to see where those weaknesses lie. Most famously, or one famous company, and we've had Brett on from Huxworks talking about it before, the Huxworks suppressor is a 3D printed titanium suppressor, which allows for geometry that cannot or is extremely cost prohibitive to attempt to build or manufacture in any other format. So 3D printing, or 3D or additive manufacturing as it might be referred to, is a key component, a key method of creating these new suppressors. And flow-through suppressors can have certain drawbacks. One of them is being light. Not how lightweight they are, but how much light is emitted out of the end of that suppressor. We might have brought it up before, but we'll have to bring it up again. Well, a lot of manufacturers on the ground, or a lot of where so much of the firearms gun culture, the citizen population has been very interested in the sound suppression capabilities of various suppressors, going so forth to judge which one has a better tone. In a more quote-unquote combat scenario where you're in a two-way range, the light emission oftentimes, or very well, will be the bigger problem, the bigger thing that you want to eliminate. So if I could make a near silent gun, but that still had that light flash at the end, it would be less beneficial for me than if I could have a gun, if I would fire a firearm that had some sound, even if it was reduced from its traditional or its classic unsuppressed state, but no light. That would be better, because then I wouldn't be giving that speed of light identification of my current location. And so one of the things that we're seeing, and we're going to say, I'll use some examples. I brought them up earlier, but it's the new Sandman X, or the Sandman 10. It's the Sandman X for Roman numeral 10 from Dead Air. Has a kind of hybrid system with their Triskelion design internals that ends with what I understand to be a more traditional baffle stack ending, which is their Nomad style baffles. What that means is that they are trying to do a combination of not only materials, but in this case, they're doing a combination of geometry inside the suppressor to get the benefits of that lower back pressure, but also not having the long-term or the longevity issues of a flow-through suppressor. We're also seeing companies like B&T address this by using different materials at different points with their, what is it they call it? Is it the print? They've got a really neat suppressor coming out, and I'm looking forward to it because they've chosen certain parts a certain way, and they've built it in a certain fashion where you are getting your reduced back pressure, but you're not having the sparking issue, or as they say, you're not supposed to be having the sparking issue that comes in titanium, and I'm very interested to see where that goes. Finally, Huxworks does also have a new suppressor coming out that addresses some of the challenges that have come with 3D printed suppressors, mainly removing them and putting them on. And so they've changed the shape of the nose or the muzzle end of their suppressors to make it easier to take on and put on and take off, but also with a wrench. It's kind of this smart multi-use component or multi-use shape near the muzzle end of the gun, which doubles or functions, more importantly, as a flash hider. Moving away from suppressors, lasers was another big talk, and we're hoping to see that IR and night vision capable lasers are becoming more and more available to the civilian market. Leading that charge right now looks like it's going to be Holosun. With whether or not the memes last regarding that, the Holosun laser, their iris system, I got some time with it, but not really any under night vision. I got to see that it was very lightweight. It seemed rather simple to use, and it's rather lightweight. It seems rather simple to use, and it does come in multiple versions. But the Iris 3 is the one that I'm most interested in. That is an IR point flood and visible laser option. I think it has a visible override, if I'm not mistaken. I remember playing with all of them for a little while and just kind of every time confirming that top button is a visible override. That allows you in a low light, no light scenario to change the tune or the tone if the lights come on and you need to confirm or immediately switch over to a different dot. Co-located or co-witnessed would be maybe one way of saying it. But it's another option, and I think it could be a good one. It looks promising. It doesn't mean that there aren't any contenders, but most of them are in a different tax bracket. So as they roll out, I want to spend more time with them. I had mentioned only briefly on Instagram that one of the points on the Iris by Holosun that I thought was interesting, and I'll see if it sticks when we see more of them in the field, is that it's the laser or the emitter turns on immediately when you press the button, whether it's the tape switch or the button on the unit. But when you let go, there's this like 1/3 to half a second-ish delay before it shuts off. Now, for most people, and I think this is going to be just fine, but for those who are more or who are used to kind of that team leader-ish group unit background, I do not be surprised if someone who is in the position of your team leader gives you a bit of a ribbing for not turning off your laser too quickly. Is this a game changer? No. Is it a deal breaker? Also no. But it more emphasizes that you need to know the equipment that your team is using, because if you say, hey, shut off your laser, they let go of the button, and there's that half second, don't start yelling at them, because it's time, cognation, and everything kind of working its way out. Outside of that, we are seeing plate carriers again. Spiritus has its new LV120, which has a slight thinner design. I've heard the LV119 referred to as a little bit of a t-shirt cut. I don't have one myself, but I've seen them enough times to kind of get or to understand where they're coming with it from here. But the LV120 does integrate semi-rigid or thermoplastic kind of materials to give you that hybrid plate carrier that does have its modularity, which Spiritus is still known for. It's challenging the likes of the Cry Ranger or the Cry Ranger plate carrier or the Faro FCPC5, but it has some features that might set it off to one side where the others will go the other way. Namely, the Cry plate carrier is very much so a complete system and sometimes can feel a little bit proprietary just from observation, not from experience, whereas the LV120 by Spiritus does try to play the best of both worlds just from observation. I'd like to spend some more time with them or see them in the field. Outside of that, though, radios were another serious, interesting item. Not only is Disco 32 coming out, or they have released a new push-to-talk, which seems to remedy many of the challenges of more traditional ones, but they have their new push-to-talk does fit with multiple different radio systems. Well, not out of the box. You can buy it capable of functioning with multiple different radio systems, and its mounting system isn't, let's say, mind-blowing from just looking at it, but a closer inspection illustrates how they put some forward thought into how people attach their push-to-talks, their little buttons for their radios, how they mount them to their plate carrier. This way, hopefully to alleviate the challenges that come with a horizontal button or a front-facing button while protecting it, and also having some waterproof capabilities, dustproof capabilities, and so on and so forth. So that kind of illustrates some of the little things that are going on right now. Wave Relay has a new component that allows a SIM card use with their MPU5 unit. It's an attachment, and they are looking at the different ways that different people will or do or already carry the MPU5, and they're looking at how it's been implemented in the field and trying to find better ways to make it less of a outstanding item is probably not the best language, but a less of a standout. I'm trying to say not less of a good thing. They're trying to have it. The radio on a plate carrier oftentimes takes up a lot of space and weight and generates heat, and they're aware of how different end users in different professions carry their radio unit, and they're starting to look at different ways where they can implement that into different types of kit so that it fits the end user better. That also illustrates how, even though some of these positions or places or companies within the, quote, industry are harder to get a hold of, it's not like they're not paying attention to you. And that is not a reference to Wave Relay themselves, but to some other companies. You've got Palmetto State Armory saying that it's likely that their MP7 or their Palmetto State Armory small MP7 looking device that fires a 5.7 round will be available as soon as Q3, maybe Q4. That means by the end of summer, we could be playing Navy SEAL at home. Other than that, they also have a series of, I think I did see some of their shotguns and a prototype of the Jackal 2.0, which loses or sacrifices the AR-15 lower for a proprietary lower that gives them a smoother, it's supposed to be giving them, and we hope to see this follow through, a smoother recoil impulse from that bolt carrier moving back and forth, as well as a lighter forend. The frustration, or one of the challenges with the PSA Jackal, the 1.0, and the one that you've seen at our public land cleanups, is that the front end tends to be heavy. The newer version has a lot. I think the stock is improved on it quite a bit. The one that they have, again, they're going a lot more for something that's a bit more proprietary, and I think they've made some pretty quality improvements going forward. We hope to see it turns out, but right now it seems a little promising. Then there were a couple of misnomers, things that popped up, like a VSS, I can't even remember the name anymore. It's too late recording. But that the VSS, the suppressed Eastern or comm block style, integrally suppressed, small rifle looking thing, the Vitez. Yeah, whatever. The one that we saw at the show, the suppressor was made by B&T, and the body was made by another company that is going to be trying to release them this year. And most notably, a lot of them are coming out in 300 Blackout. The way that they have come to design that gun is quite a bit, on my end, is a little bit more interesting, because they were building a series of kits and they said, we can actually do this ourselves. And so we hope the best for them, and we'd like to see that come to the market, even though I doubt it's going to be in a mass production scale. Still, good on them, and good on seeing those parts of the industry. Finally, the two big chatter points that are probably going to be on the front of a number of magazine style review pages are going to be the new mount, Kowa, I think it's the COA, the Kowa mount by aim point, which is going to be being available for a while exclusively on Glock. The new mounting system looks like it's challenging the hegemony of the mounting systems in the past, and I think they called it an alpha cut. I'm pretty sure that's what they referred to it. Looks like it's going to eventually be available on other platforms, but right now is exclusively a Glock thing. Does it look like it's going to be more robust? Yes. The appearances, and by all intents, the appearances look like we're going to have a new style of red dot that can be mounted on a handgun that may suffer from its own challenges. But continuing in that trend, I'm going to close a little bit with the staccato. And I'm going to move on to the staccato and the Brownell's BRN 182 or 3 Generation 3. So the staccato, the new staccato, does move in a direction that I think is good for that platform. A Glock magazine gun isn't new. A Glock magazine 2011 isn't new. But there's some things that were severely paid attention to with this one that I think might give it an edge, if it's not just the brand name. And that is, they put gas pedal cuts for both the right hand and the left hand. They made it completely ambidextrous, and it doesn't have that grip safety that you're used to with 2011 platforms. The Glock magazines are one of the weaknesses of the 2011 platform is their magazines. It's not that they're weak magazines, it's that they're expensive and hard to get. Glock magazines are ubiquitous. You can find them anywhere, and they're really easy to maintain and replace if you do so damage them. So let's hope for the best, and I want to see it coming forward. Lastly, the BRN 180 3.0 or the Gen 3 BR180 upper is a departure from the retrofuturist model of the past into something that I think is going to challenge that dual guide rod gas piston system upper or even firearm as a total, and I hope the best for it. I think that it has a number of strengths, as in it is not too heavy, it is not too light, it doesn't suffer, it doesn't feel frail. The controls on it are extremely easy to use, and it looks like they paid attention to any of the weaknesses that come in that firearm, particularly paying attention to failure points in the past, notably where the barrel mounts to the receiver. So that is a wrap-up and a closing of SHOT Show 2024. If you've enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and give us a like below. Leave a comment on something that I might have missed, and maybe I can follow up with you on it. And as usual, go forth and conquer.